University is soon going to celebrate its 10th anniversary here on Cape Cod. We have a long and proud history of providing higher education on both the undergraduate and graduate levels to students here on Cape Cod and the South Shore and the islands as well. I expect that many of you here in the room have some personal association with Suffolk University, Cape Cod, either as a student, as an alumni, or perhaps as an employer who's reaping the benefits of those wise and accomplished students in the community. We may have placed an intern with you at some point, or we may have partnered with you in research. In any case, we're very proud to be part of this community and look forward to another exciting decade here on Cape Cod. We have a very wonderful panel today, and I'm personally very, very excited about this topic, to be exploring matters of leadership with some of the most dynamic leaders here on Cape Cod today.
I would like to thank the panelists for their willingness to participate in this discussion. It took a little bit of courage on all of their parts, and I'm excited about that. But mostly, too, I want to commend Gemma Lambert and the Sawyer School of Management at Suffolk University for understanding the importance of this issue and having the vision to frame up a session that I think we're all going to draw some values from. So again, I want to commend Gemma for pulling this together this morning. It is a timely issue, almost eerily timely. This week, of course, the Business Roundtable, and there are some members here, issued their call to action. Monday, there'll be a co-sponsored housing summit with BRT and Housing Assistance Corporation. There's been a tremendous amount of dialogue about wastewater and transportation issues this week, and it has all begged the question of why this issue of leadership on Cape Cod is so important in terms of addressing our regional issues. I do have to say there was no collusion in the timing here, though. I don't know when the BRT decided to do their call to action and the date, but this date was set a long time before that. So we weren't playing into their hands. I just want to dispel any rumors to that effect. There is a number of significant regional and local issues facing Cape Cod, including workforce housing, transportation, wastewater, water quality, and others. As we said in the call to this meeting this morning, whose job is it to address those issues? What's the role of the media, the business community, government at all levels, academia, the nonprofit sector, and others in addressing these solutions? So I'll turn this over now to Dan Wolf.
Actually, that question has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. That's one of the qualities of leadership is we don't have to answer the question directly. And I also noticed you didn't mention one of this week's events being Tom DeLay, which I won't either. After tossing and turning all night thinking, what am I going to talk about relative to leadership? And this isn't going to go on for 15 minutes. You don't have to worry about flashing lights at me. I came down this morning and I said, I'm going to do what I normally do when I have to speak to people. I'm going to ask my two remaining at home teenage daughters what I should talk about this morning. One of them is 13 and one of them is 16. One of them had to be at the bus at 6:15, the other one at 7, so I caught them on the way out the door. The first one, so I said leadership in the county, what are we, what's it about? The first one looked at me and said, and I kid you not, down with leadership, screw the man, anarchy. And I was terrified about what the second one might say. I'm not making this up. So here I am to talk about leadership, and this is what my first one gives. And my second one actually engaged me in what was a really meaningful conversation, and I'm sort of going to set the table with this challenge. Leadership really isn't about issues. Leadership is about how we deal with issues. It's about the quality of the people that are leading us to deal with those issues and the character of the people who are leading us to deal with those issues. So I'm just going to read a list of qualities that I actually had the dialogue with my teenage daughter, and then I'm going to leave it to the rest. My leaders are people who I trust, people who build consensus, people who are fair, people who set an example and then live by that example. This is a good one from a 16-year-old. People who inspire me with vision, inclusion, and love, not motivate me with fear, exclusion, and hate. people who I believe, people who I want to know better, and people who are willing to express emotion, people who empathize, people who sympathize, people who connect, people who can always connect an issue to a vision. So I think that's appropriate with a lot of the specific issues that Dorothy talked about. Do they connect to some higher vision of what we want the region to be about? And I think that was really neat because I tried to engage my children in some of the wastewater and housing and other issues, but they kept coming back to the quality of the people who are actually leading us. One of the things that I think about leadership looking back is John Kennedy's challenge to get us to the moon. And I thought, you know, am I in any way a leader? And then I realized that 2 years ago, Cape Air made the decision to go to Guam. And we actually have an operation in Guam. And about the closest thing that I can say that Cape Air has done to walking on the moon, if anybody here has been to Guam, you'll know what I mean, is actually operating a region in Guam. But I sort of leave it to you now. I think that was 5 minutes.
Very good, excellent.
I brought with me this great little pen here that says, blame it on the media. And it's always kind of fun to wear sometimes. So if there are any issues on Cape Cod that we just simply cannot solve, just blame it on the media. Everybody else does. Okay, so regional challenges across Cape Cod. There's no question that everybody in this room feels that they are a stakeholder in Cape Cod and that they have some sense of responsibility for addressing these issues, right? Right, and that's, I assume, why you're all here this morning, and maybe not at the Tech Council's competing breakfast that was talking about bionics this morning and whether or not the $6 million man was actually reality or not. So I'm glad that you chose to join us this morning and talk about regional issues rather than bionics. What I want to talk to you a little bit about is, I guess, my perspective on these issues as a leader of a media organization, your daily newspaper, I hope. Again, everybody in this room feels that these issues are their responsibility, I'm sure, but do we agree on what the issues are? And before we can solve the issues, certainly we must agree on what those issues are. So one of the things that we do as a newspaper is take a swipe at those issues each year with what we call the editorial agenda. And this year's editorial agenda looks at good jobs, okay, or bringing good jobs to Cape Cod. And this is a section that's published at the beginning of the year, in January of every year. And you'll find a web component as well. And the website gives us all kinds of ability to take that a step further. We can share analysis on an ongoing basis. We can share every editorial that's written on this particular subject. We can share contributions from the public on these particular issues. And you can find that on our website. Can I do a commercial? No, I think I'll hold that. Okay, so good jobs for sure, affordable housing, or I should say or workforce housing, another critical issue. School funding, I think we'll all agree is a critical issue. Environmental protection, which includes ocean planning, includes wastewater management, smart growth, things of that nature, and open government. So those are the 5 issues that we identified early on this year, and we'll be doing follow-up editorials and stories, of course, throughout the course of the year. So again, I look at these issues really from 2 perspectives. One, as a business leader, we have a pretty good-sized business here on Cape Cod, and 2, as the publisher of the daily newspaper. I'll focus my comments really on being a publisher of the daily newspaper. It was Mark Twain that said, the duty of the press, okay, the duty of the press is to tell the truth and raise hell. And we try to fulfill that mission in 2 different ways. Our duty is to tell the truth in the news pages. So the stories that you read day in and day out are to be accurate and truthful and unbiased. I know not everybody always looks at things through the same lens, so that's a tough one. That's a tough one to accomplish. But certainly it's a sharing of the facts of that particular issue. We lay those issues out, present possible solutions, let the people in the community know exactly what's happening, what those issues are, etc. Of course, we live in a democracy, right? And in order for people to make informed decisions, the citizenry needs to be informed. They need to know what's going on, and that's what the news pages are intended to do. The second part of that mission, which is to raise hell, happens in the editorial pages or the opinion pages. Certainly, there are cases where even though you lay out the facts, people interpret those facts differently. Or maybe there are other issues where all the facts aren't known yet. And in those cases, there are editorial pages to share opinions. Again, the news pages do not advocate for change. They're there to lay out what the issues are. The editorial page is to advocate change. It's there to stir people to action. And you can raise hell on the editorial page in 4 different ways, all of which are legal. Certainly there are letters to the editor, which gives people across the community a voice to share their opinion of what's going on. There are the editorials that the newspaper puts together where we can lay out issues, we can give our opinion, hopefully an informed opinion of what's going on and what the solution might be. We have point counterpoints, so people that are stakeholders in particular issues. I know, in fact, maybe everybody on this panel has written a point counterpoint. Again, these are issues that perhaps all the facts aren't yet known, but there are some strong opinions. There's a place to share that on the editorial page. And then, of course, there are columnists that have a bias or a view or a propensity to interpret the facts one way or another, and those columnists run daily on the editorial page. So again, this is a case where we're trying to advocate for change, trying to stir people to action. In the end, it's really the role of the newspaper, or my role, is to make sure that the newspaper connects people to the issues, lays those issues out, keeps people informed. In the end, however, it's the people that hold the authority, the people that that are the voters, that will make the decisions and really affect change across the region on these particular issues.
If you go through the issues, housing, water, and the like, and say who's responsible for the leadership, clearly they encompass everyone, or all institutions in our society. But I would suggest that right now that they're the responsibility of government more than anyone else. I mean, government does most of the water, most of the wastewater, some of the housing, provides the roads, and so forth. And when you look at government on Cape Cod right now, we're dealing with 4 levels: federal, state, regional, county, and town. 2 of them, the first 2, federal and state, until 3 or 4 years ago, played a major role. They were the pipelines. Whatever the problem was, everybody runs up to Washington or Boston trying to get some money to solve it, and that was the be-all, end-all to everything. And I would suggest one of our problems still is that's the mentality of which many of us operate, that, geez, if we can just get a lot of money, we can take care of this problem. Might have been partly true at one point. Certainly isn't true now. The Business Roundtable has said is working on Cape's problems, just put out a statement. There are 3 different places in that statement which would be much facilitated by billions of dollars. Wastewater, transferring development rights, and housing. And I doubt very much we now have no new taxation simplest running both the federal and the state governments. When that'll change, I don't know, but I doubt if we're going to get that billions of dollars for any one of those 3, let alone deal with the where do we come. So the federal and the state government, all of a sudden, a little bit more, we're down to, hey, are the towns and the county going to solve our problem? County government, I would suggest, is still somewhat nascent. A new structure operates under more obscurity than the others on Cape Cod. This is not a criticism of anyone or the like, and indeed I suggest if you went around, if Peter's paper did a survey and asked the people on Cape Cod how many people even know who represents themselves, their town and the county assembly or the Cape Cod Commission, the response rate would be pretty slow. So one of the 2 things we're working on is still struggling to establish what it is. The other one is 15 different towns, people in P-Town and Falmouth don't have an awful lot in common. I think they probably both go to Boston more than they go to each other. And the like, they have a bunch of conflicting boards in many towns. Some are for development, some are against it. So on Cape Cod, when you talk about the county and the towns, you're talking about a lot of sprawl in government of several types. So I'll just wrap it up quickly and say that when it comes to leadership, and Cape Cod is unique right now, we have far too many leaders and not enough leadership.
I don't know if I can even attempt to be as profound as some of the things that we've heard over the last 10 or 15 minutes, but I certainly will try. First of all, I want to say how fascinated I was and am at the challenge that Suffolk University posed in putting this seminar together, because I think it might be the first time where we got past debating what the issues are, and even past what the solutions are, so that we could focus on how we are going to get it done. The truth is, in a kind of a surprising way, if you look at the surveys that are consistently done on Cape Cod, whether it was the one that was recently done by the Cape Cod Commission, or if you look at the one that happens to be done in the town of Barnstable every year, the residents of our communities are very clear and very consistent in terms of what they think the issues are facing their communities. And they've been mentioned already today: affordable housing, environmental protection, traffic congestion, and the like. And so we have a political environment where there is no real need to spend an inordinate amount of time debating what the issues are. We know what the issues are. So that begs the question, and is the purpose of this forum, how do we generate the leadership to get the job done? I remember an old-timer once told me, in talking about my role in the public sector, is that if you're going to be a selectman or a state representative or a town manager, you might as well take on the responsibility, because you're going to get all the blame anyways. And there was more than a little truth to that statement. I think on Cape Cod, in the end, the question is not only whose job is it to demonstrate leadership to get the job done. I think, unfortunately, at times we spend too much time on whose job isn't it. You know, we hear so much complaint recently about some regional efforts to address concerns. You know, I heard a local official recently criticize our county commissioners and our regional effort to try to recognize that the issue of sewering in environmental protection on Cape Cod is not a municipal issue. At the end of the day, it's a regional issue. But there was much criticism lodged at our county commissioners because they had proposed that we look at this as a regional issue. And I thought that that was rather shocking from a town official who leads a community who does not have 1 square inch of their community under any sort of sewering at this time. So we have a situation where at times there is criticism from those who choose not to demonstrate leadership to those who are at least attempting to get the job done. You think of things, the number one issue that keeps coming up in Barnstable, for example, as a reason why we have seen a diminution of our quality of life is traffic congestion. Now, that can be a very complex issue, and I know we're not supposed to get into the specifics of issues, but we all know that if you're going to do something like improve a major transportation corridor like Route 28, the common sense would dictate, while each community should step up to the plate and try to improve the situation, that that's a regional issue. That if Mashpee does a wonderful job and Barnstable sticks its head in the sand, that you're not going to accomplish a free-flowing traffic corridor, which is at the heart of what people are complaining about when they say in our surveys you've got to do something about traffic congestion. So that is an issue that begs for a regional approach. And so I guess the message that I wanted to plant, or the seed I wanted to plant, is that Yes, we need to answer the question about whose job it is, but as local officials, as members of the business community, as members of the media, we have to understand as well that this really isn't about us. That there may be issues and there may be entities that are much more suited to more effectively address the issue than we are. There is a tremendous amount of parochialism on Cape Cod, as all of you know, and some of that suits our communities very well. And I serve in a community, as you may know, that has independent fire districts. They aren't even part of the town government. So I know a lot about parochialism and this desire by Cape Codders to hold on to the neighborhoods in their villages. But we're talking about global issues, much larger issues that really can't be addressed at the local level. And so I think that when we get to how do we approach this and what we do, I'll be talking about collaborative efforts and trying to recognize that the county has a legitimate role, that some of these issues are regional in nature, and communities, the private sector and others have to give up and become more willing partners in our approach to addressing these issues. And I say, from someone that's been involved for almost 25 years now, that there obviously, when we talk about water quality, when we talk about the challenge of affordable housing and the congestion in transportation arteries, there is now a sense of urgency that if we don't take on the responsibility to address these issues, we are fundamentally going to change this place that we call Cape Cod. And as one who was born and raised here, I frequently hear from people that have been here on Cape Cod a long time, and they suggest that Cape Cod is lost. Well, all of us know that while we've seen significant and profound change in some ways, that this place that we call home is still a remarkable place that people continue to come to when they could go anywhere else on God's green earth. But there is an urgency. So I think that the message that I want to leave with you is that we need to stop fighting about what the issues are, because we know what they are. We need to stop debating in any profound sense about what the solutions are, because for the most part, we've figured that out as well. And we need to join hands, the private sector, government, the media, and others, to get the job done.
I think John did a good job of saying we're moving back. The focus of this morning's discussion is not to talk about the solutions. We will be talking about that, though, in terms of what the overall leadership solution is, and that will be the final question that I will pose to the panelists. Dan talked about the qualities of leadership. Peter talked about the role of the media. Elliot discussed the responsibilities of the various levels of government. And John got into that even more in terms of saying there are some people that are responsible for the resolution to issues, and others who actually don't have any responsibility, more than happy to criticize. That actually deals with the second question, which is, since you are all individuals who have accepted leadership for part of the solution, you don't fall into John's category of somebody who hasn't and is willing to criticize. And therefore, constructively, I'm asking you to grade the efforts of those who are in fact responsible for the solutions facing the regional issues facing Cape Cod.
I think I'd just like to offer some general comments in that regard. In terms of government, clearly when we turn to those major issues of the day, I can be as critical as anyone here in terms of looking at individual communities, some who've done a fairly effective job and some who haven't even begun to address issues at all. And while it's always easy to criticize government, the types of issues that we're talking about surround the issue of growth management, and we have an environment, a governmental structure that is low in terms of efficiency and supposedly high in terms of accountability. You know, in a town that only has 1 or 2 town meetings a year, it's very difficult for local officials and communities to get zoning ordinances drafted, ready to go, and with one bite of the apple for the entire year, it's very difficult at times to fight special interests and get a zoning measure through. And if you miss that in the one town meeting a year, unless you call a special town meeting, you have to wait for it next year as well. And as well, when we're talking about zoning and growth patterns or whatever, Massachusetts, for some strange reason, and I know that all of you are aware of this, has laws that are very pro-property rights, much more so than the 49 other states. And so it is very difficult, even if you have a community that shows leadership, to actually get regulations and rules promulgated that impact prospectively with grandfathering rights as well. And so I think that we can look at each town. Some have done a better job than others on these issues. But certainly, and so I applaud those communities that have been proactive, but certainly every one of our towns need to be more proactive, as I said, with the urgency of making some decisions that are going to profoundly impact our communities for decades to come. In terms of the media, I once again will not be that critical. I am clearly understanding that our newspapers aren't just there to serve the general public in terms of informing and educating. They're a business as well. And a long time ago, we lost many publications in southeastern Massachusetts and on Cape Cod that tended to address each issue much more comprehensively. That isn't what you see these days. And so even recognizing that our media are businesses, there still is a profound responsibility to provide the necessary information so informed decisions can be made. I can remember a year or two ago, it was probably about a year ago, I was talking to a local reporter and I said, you know, you're not doing very much in your newspaper about in dealing with the significant issue of affordable housing, and the response was from the reporter was, oh yes we are, we did a supplement 3 years ago. And so there not only is a responsibility to inform, but I think there's a responsibility to continue that as well. The business community, for many, many years, when people in the 70s and 80s and 90s were talking about the need to check growth, to manage growth, there were many in the business community that thought that was a message of overbearing, an overbearing government. And I think that we have seen a pretty profound transformation on Cape Cod with the business community now understanding that their role is not to on every issue fight government and fight initiatives, but to sit at the table and be a active participant. And I applaud my local chambers of commerce, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, Business Improvement District, and other business groups and most recently, like the Business Roundtable, people that have come to the table not to criticize, but to be part of the solution as well. And so I think at the end of the day, while I am pleased that we have seen movement on these major issues, whether it's government, business, or the media, I think there always is room for improvement by all three.
Good, good, John.
Dorothy, following up on what I said previously, and those that know me know that I'm sort of the half-empty person. If you look at a glass and it's half full, who does no good to congratulate yourself for the fullness, and I just go for the empty part. What can we do to make it better? Following from that, when I graded all these, nobody flunks on Cape Cod, but there aren't any A's anywhere. They're all somewhere in the middle. I would give, by a slim margin, the highest grade to the media. Yes, they have problems. Most of them are owned off Cape, and they all get a call every 18 months from the boss somewhere else telling them to get rid of 3 more reporters or something like that. So yes, the coverage does slowly sink in the West, which is a problem of the nation, that all of the newspapers become more focused all the time with selling ads and less with what they're putting on their papers, but by and large, I would give the media slightly better than the rest. We are lucky to still have a number of publications, and there is pretty good coverage of local issues. To flip that around, maybe I'm a little bit different from John. I would give the worst to the business community still. The same problem that I've cited to in government. Too many leaders, not enough leadership, is even more true of the business community. We have never on Cape Cod had a lot of large leadership business institutions where, not that big is necessarily better, but big has more time to send somebody out to work on common problems as opposed to running their own business all the time. And we've been losing, like everywhere else, we've been losing business units. And all of these things have a good side and a bad side, but we are almost a frontier business community where everybody is profoundly interested in themselves. We have too many of most types of units, restaurants and the like, up and down the roads, and they're all a little too self-interested, looking at every issue, saying what's that in that for me, which is not always in their own, ironically, not always in their own self-interest. I would argue very strongly that improving the community ultimately benefits all the units of it, whereas if you focus on all the individual units, you don't improve the community. I would agree with John, we're going in the right direction. The Cape Chamber of Commerce in particular over the last 10, 15 years, with first John O'Brien and particularly Wendy Northcross, not particularly then Wendy Northcross, the leadership is getting better out there, but John used the phrase, the difficulty in towns on zoning changes and others of overcoming special interest groups, and unfortunately all too often those special interest groups are still collections of business people worried about their own business. The government comes somewhere in the middle. If there's a hero out there right now, it is the town of Barnstable. John has a bigger and better army than everywhere else put together, and the fact that they're having as much trouble as they are making progress, although they're making real progress, sort of is illustrative of the problem. But government would be somewhere in the middle. Some are getting better, some are getting worse, but all told, nobody flunks on Cape Cod, but nobody gets, no organizations on Cape Cod get an A for leadership. And I'll just throw in the caveat, I don't want to miss anyone. The nonprofits are somewhat the same as the business community, that every time I get in a room of nonprofits, many of which do wonderful work, but it seems like every time you get there, they're more likely to be talking about fundraising and operations, and a little less likely to be talking about what they're doing, housing and the like. And I think we have enough nonprofits. We don't have enough being done. We ought to pass a moratorium on any more nonprofits and say that anybody that has another brilliant idea, which I would encourage, go to one of the existing ones and get them to do it. We don't need any more.
I'm wishing now that maybe I didn't bring this blame it on the media pen. But when in doubt, blame it on the media. Grading the effort so far is a tough thing to do. Dorothy says grade the effort, and when I've talked to people that I work with, my colleagues, I ask to talk about results, not efforts. So I'm looking at this grading in a couple of different ways. One is, well, what is the effort, and what are the results? And as Elliot said, there are no A's and there are no flunking grades either. But in terms of effort, I think the efforts probably range closer to a B on many fronts. There's quite a few people out there making some very good efforts to make things happen. But in terms of results, I'd say the results are closer to the C level or yet worse. I mean, look at school funding. There's been a lot of effort regarding school funding for several years. You may rate that effort, grade that effort in the B+ category maybe. But in terms of results, okay? I mean, it's got to be a D, right? We've got some money coming in last year, in a couple of different mechanisms, but no, formula change at all. So I'd say it would have to be a D. Now, that could shoot up to an A, depending on whether or not one of these 18 bills passes that are in the House right now, and maybe still impact fiscal year '07. So we'll see. Of course, we might want to think in terms of grading some of these efforts on a curve as well. If you think about creating good jobs being a major regional issue, with the high-tech bust in the 2000-2001 timeframe, it's a little tough to create high-tech jobs in an environment like that. So much like giving a class a chemistry exam that everybody gets maybe half right, and the top point getter gets an A, it's really hard to judge creating good jobs and on a regular scale. So again, there are some forces there that are at work against some of these issues, even though the effort has been commendable. It's getting back to the media. The editorial agenda that was published in January and runs on the website will be checking in with progress and holding people accountable throughout the course of the year. So I think I'll hold the grading on those issues as we see them unfold here over the next year.
I guess I keep going back to sort of my political philosophy background, but I want to engage all of you because I went to college during the flowery 70s where we did self-grading and peer grading and didn't care so much about the teacher's grade. So I'm gonna put the onus back on you and back again to the qualities and character of leadership. I think leadership it involves two things. It involves looking at things from 40,000 feet so that you keep the vision in sight. What is the overall vision while you're solving the problems at 200 feet? Those things have to simultaneously happen in leadership. So I sort of would ask you all, in your mind, think of the political leaders. Are we getting a vision? And at the same time, are the issues being solved? Look at the business leaders, and I want to just take a sidestep for a second. We in this culture have gotten to the point where we way too often confuse success with leadership. Bill Gates has made $35 to $50 billion. He is not my leader. Leaders need to do a lot more than just be successful. On the political front, that means you've got to do a lot more than winning an election. It is creating a vision and then dealing with issues from the ground up. So the question I ask you is, on a regional level, how do you grade the businesses? Are we articulating a vision? Are we putting service and community in front of our own narrow self-interest? Are we solving problems consistent with that vision? Are our political leaders doing that? Is the media doing that? And with Elliot, I would probably give the media the highest score. I don't always agree with the editorial page of the Cape Cod Times, but I think they really are trying very hard to articulate a vision. I think it's incredible, some of the work. I look at Bill Doherty here, who I thought was on a road trip, but obviously, yeah.
So pick it up.
Pick it up. But I mean, Bill's being here is another, I run into Bill everywhere I go, out there trying to be a leader, trying to create a vision. But the question is that happening consistently? The town of Barnstable with the growth incentive zone that was passed yesterday, that is huge leadership. I want to just talk about some specific issues, and that's the grade I want to give. I think wastewater, land use, affordable housing, economic growth, those issues, we are seeing some leadership and we are seeing some movement. But I look for more for our leaders for more than that. I think, let's take the energy issue. It's been sort of captivated by this wind farm, but I'm looking for much more leadership from our leaders. How about a bold statement like, let's make Cape Cod energy self-sufficient in 20 or 30 years. Let's set some goals, let's set some visions. Let's walk on the moon. And there's no reason we can't do that. Instead, there is a void of leadership on the energy issue, I would argue, in all three realms. And then I think it's legitimate for leaders to articulate vision, articulate opinion, even in arenas where they don't necessarily have any say. And I'd like to use the healthcare as an example for that. I would love to see some leadership, some courage, somebody stand up and say, we need a government-sponsored health care plan in this country. Why doesn't anybody say things like that? Whether you agree with it or not, it would be nice if people were doing it. And that involves a modicum of courage, as well as the ability to see things from a high altitude and a low altitude, pardon the aviation analogy, at the same time. So I'm going to ask you to grade. I think there's room for improvement, but unlike Elliot, I like to see things as 3/4 full.
What can be done to improve leadership? You just began giving some of those suggestions. What actually can be done to improve leadership on Cape Cod?
What can be done to improve it? I wish people would be more articulate, be bolder, and leadership, I totally agree with what both Elliot and John has said. There's a difference between being a leader and exhibiting leadership. You know, I am so fortunate to be in a position where I'm running a company, I've been successful in all of those things. That's where the battle begins, it's not where it ends. And I just wish people would be out there more, articulating a vision, and then connecting what we do to achieve that vision, instead of sort of myopically putting our head down and saying, okay, this is one issue, not connected to anything, this is another issue, not connected to anything. The fact is they're all connected to each other. And the leaders are all connected. Business, media, government, it is all connected, and even nonprofits. We love the nonprofits.
Well, as I was contemplating this question, I wonder, and I think Elliot said it before, if you get the right people into a room focused on the right issue at the right time with their agendas aside, great things can happen. And I think these issues you know, might be open to that kind of approach. The question is, who would make up this team to deal with, say, wastewater management, where people could put their biases aside, their agendas aside, their political agendas aside, and focus on solving this problem. And I mean really focus on solving this problem, because that's what it would take. I'm not sure who can do that. Maybe it is Elliot in the Business Roundtable. Maybe they can assemble some issue-based leadership teams where that team's objective is to solve that problem, and you get stakeholders in each one of the sectors, I guess, that are involved in that issue, whether it's politics or business or nonprofit or whatever the case might be. But it seems to me that we need that level of focus to move these issues forward. We need everybody on the same page. We need everybody committed to making it happen. Who can make that happen? Again, there's a Business Roundtable that's already there. They've taken a great leadership role on some issues. Maybe this is one that they can take on as well. Or, you know, I see this as a great opportunity for an up-and-coming politician. I mean, to step out front and say, you know, let's make these things happen. This could be a great platform for somebody to run on, and I hope somebody takes advantage of that.
Very interesting that if somebody came to me and said, what organization anywhere governmental has done the best job of solving a problem in the last 30 years, the one that certainly comes to mind first is the MWRA, the Mass Water Resources Authority, which had a much bigger problem than Cape Cod. You know, they had all of Cape Cod Bay polluted, Boston Harbor, on and on and on. It even made it to the presidential election. And it's very interesting because the MWRA was created by the courts. The process never would have done it, and I've sort of several times in rooms on Cape Cod suggested, gee, we need something like that, and you get scorned out of the room. And I'm not naive enough to think it will happen, but I think we still have to take a lesson from it that we, on most of our problems, we have too many people talking for too long, and we need to find a way to give a few good men and women the authority to go off and do something about it, about them. And so I think that's the focus that we should have if we want to solve some of these problems. How can we get the right people and put them in a situation where they can do something about it, instead of having all kinds of organizations talking about them on and on and on and on.
I would only add that, that our philosophy must be that we are writing the final few chapters in terms of the legacy or the destiny of Cape Cod, and that if we begin in a very collective way to adopt a philosophy which states that inaction is no longer an option, I think that we will be well served. We make a mistake, I think, is particularly in government these days, by thinking that because our citizens are so involved with their day-to-day lives that they no longer choose to or want to participate in this process. And I don't have the time to talk about 8 or 10 initiatives that we adopted in Barnstable that have brought thousands of people into the process, much more so in the past. And so while I agree that it is time for smaller groups of people to step up to the plate to make decisions, that doesn't mean that we shut the doors and not have an inclusionary process. In all of the issues that have been raised, certainly the issue of coastal protection and water quality and sewering, the huge issue there is the cost, and we need to work with our federal delegation and our state delegation to do that. The other issues that have been raised are all issues that not only can be solved, we already know how to solve them. We just have to get the will to put our egos and our pettiness and our parochialism aside to get the job done. We're writing the last final chapters. Decades into the future, people will look to see how we handle this. Cape Cod is still a very special place, but we don't have the luxury of time anymore. We need action from our leaders. We need action from our business community. We need action from the media. And the optimism in me says, while the bad news is that we should have acted much more forcefully in the past, there's still time to get the job done.
From all of you, thank you. You know, John has said inaction is not an option, and each of the speakers has said we have to empower the right people, and yet, as John says, with inclusion, and you discussed that earlier in your comments, Dan, get the right people in the right room, empower them to actually undertake these, and that's the way that you actually create and improve leadership. Again, we keep saying too many leaders, not enough leadership.
Morning. You made a great deal of good points about problems and solving them. I think we're pretty good about knowing what the problems are and coming up with solutions, and a lot of times great ideas. But the question always comes up, and I work for a nonprofit, is who is going to pay for this, and will they pay for it?
And this is from the 40,000-foot view, and obviously there's a lot of political agenda and personal belief in this. It is bordering on shameful that we live in a place, and I'm regional yes, state yes, national yes, where we want a lot to happen, but simply refuse to look at how we have to pay for it. And if there's one leadership issue that is a hot button issue for me, it is leadership, and I'm willing to do it on the business side, but business leadership is sort of in the dumps these days with all of our lack of leadership and malfeasance. Leaders need to step forward now and say, as the richest society ever inhabiting the face of the planet, how can we look at things like what we're doing with our medical care, what we're doing with our housing, what we're doing relative to feeding people, all of those issues, and what are we going to do about distributing wealth a little bit differently so that we take care of people better. And this 1,000 points of light, and I'm involved in a lot of nonprofits. I'm not dissing nonprofits. I completely support nonprofits. But to expect all this to happen on its own in the nonprofit community is absurd, because it can't. So I think we're looking for some political leadership to raise some money in the way that we know politicians can do it.
First, that's really a presidential politics question. Where the money's going to come from is on a level of as high as you can get in the United States right now, and there need to be some changes. And I agree with Dan, but I'll go back and I'll say, it's up to 6. Education and medicine, which are probably the 2 fundamental cornerstones of the greatness of America since it started, have taken tremendous hits in their funding. recently, and are going to continue to get weaker in certain respects rather than better if they're not restored. So one could argue that when the big spigots in the sky turn on again, if they ever do, that those are the two top priorities. Then you get to housing, which would have been third, and I'm not ranking these. You get to wastewater. John just mentioned the coastal one, and if there's a hidden issue, we know we got a lot of coastal issues, but I would still say if there's a hidden issue on Cape Cod right now, that's it. I mean, you read some of these global warming stories and start thinking of the implications of a higher sea level in 20, 30, 50 years, and you're into dramatic needs for funds. So you can easily get it up to 6 or so, the things where we need billions of dollars. And I'm all for getting them. My politics are with Dan, but we've just got to learn here on Cape Cod that these are national political issues, and yes, we should be influencing them, but we also ought to be doing everything we can to work on these problems, to craft solutions as best we can that aren't dependent on billions of dollars coming in from somewhere else.
We have often made great leaps forward as a society because the courts have pulled us there, not because other leadership brought us there, and civil rights comes to mind, of course. And we bemoan the litigious society and all of that stuff, but can you envision a way that we could engage the courts to help move us forward on some of these problems we face?
If I could focus, Kathy, on the issue of sewering and environmental protection, I think that if we continue with our inaction, we will guarantee litigation. I absolutely believe that if we don't heed the call of Bill Doherty and the county commissioners and Tom Bernardo and other county officials, if we don't start seriously addressing this, it absolutely is just a matter of time before someone files a federal action against us and having, as a result, just like it happened in the Boston area, a federal court ordering a implementation plan to protect the environment. And so I think that if we continue to do nothing, it guarantees court action. And by saying that, I'm certainly hoping that we will follow the lead of the county commissioners and the assembly and others to get going on that issue.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bridgewater, the executive director of the Lower Cape Cod CDC. And my question is about young people on the Cape. We know that we're losing the 18 to 34-year-old population. I was delighted to hear Dan talking to his daughter for answers. And I'm curious what you all think about engaging the younger emerging leaders on the Cape, both that are already in leadership positions or that can be cultivated to move into them. Thank you.
I think so many things that we're talking about today, do connect us or not. Connect Cape Cod to young people and the prospect of them staying on the Cape. I mean, I have teenage children myself, and it's disheartening to think that they'll have to move off Cape to make a living down the road. And maybe that's not always the case, but things like affordable housing and good jobs are certainly key issues, I think, that need to be addressed to help keep our young minds here. In terms of engaging those young people that are here now into these issues, obviously, like everybody else, I'm all for it. I guess the question is, how do you facilitate that? And it's probably worth spending some brain cells on exactly that, figuring out how to facilitate that.
Well, I think this was quite fascinating. I hope that you did as well. So many of you have stayed. So I'm assuming that this has started to get your juices going, which is great. And my hope this morning was fulfilled, and that was to really start to explore these matters of leadership. And what I would like to leave you with, and as many of our students here today who benefit from all kinds of extensive explorations of issues of leadership through Suffolk University, I would say this: we are all leaders in these matters. We are all stakeholders in our communities. We all have equal rights and responsibilities and expertise from our own personal experience. What I would encourage you all to do is to go back to your communities, wherever it is that you live, and start having these dialogues around issues that we generally tend to avoid, around the most important issues, namely political issues, right? Talk with your neighbors. Start exercising those muscles of dialogue with people in your own communities. There are wonderful models out there on the national level that engage citizens in these types of listening sessions, these types of activities that where we learn about shared values. And so I think the potential is endless for all of us. I want to thank our panelists. I think it was just a wonderful event. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to another event soon.